In the FinTech ecosystem, SOC 2 readiness is no longer optional. Enterprise clients, banking partners, and institutional investors expect proof that your systems are secure, reliable, and governed by strong internal controls. Without SOC 2 compliance, enterprise deals slow down and due diligence cycles become longer and more expensive. In this video, we will break down the realistic cost of building SOC 2-ready FinTech systems in 2026 and what drives that investment. Let us begin with an important clarification. SOC 2 is not a single feature you install. It is a combination of secure architecture, operational discipline, governance policies, monitoring systems, and third-party audits. The cost depends heavily on your current system maturity. For early-stage FinTech startups with minimal infrastructure and limited compliance processes, building SOC 2 readiness from scratch typically requires an investment between $40,000 and $100,000 over several months. This includes infrastructure hardening, policy documentation, logging systems, access controls, and audit preparation. For growth-stage FinTech companies with complex systems, multiple integrations, and larger teams, total investment typically ranges between $100,000 and $250,000, depending on scope and internal gaps. For enterprise-scale FinTech platforms operating across multiple regions with high transaction volumes, advanced security controls, and complex vendor ecosystems, SOC 2 readiness costs can exceed $250,000 to $400,000 or more, especially when remediation work is extensive. Now, let us break down where this investment goes. The first cost driver is infrastructure and security upgrades. SOC 2 requires strong access control systems, encrypted data storage, secure cloud configurations, network segmentation, and centralized identity management. If your infrastructure was not designed with compliance in mind, remediation work can increase engineering costs significantly. The second major cost component is logging and monitoring systems. SOC 2 auditors expect detailed logs for access, configuration changes, security events, and system activity. Implementing centralized logging tools, security information and event management systems, and continuous monitoring capabilities typically adds both software and engineering costs. Next comes policy documentation and governance alignment. You must develop formal security policies, incident response plans, disaster recovery documentation, access management procedures, vendor risk management processes, and employee onboarding and offboarding controls. Legal and compliance consulting costs can range between $10,000 and $40,000, depending on documentation complexity. Penetration testing and vulnerability assessments are also required. Annual third-party penetration testing typically costs between $15,000 and $40,000, depending on system complexity. Ongoing vulnerability scanning and remediation efforts must also be factored into the budget. Audit and certification costs form another major portion. For SOC 2 Type 1 audits, assessment costs generally range between $15,000 and $30,000. For SOC 2 Type 2 audits, which evaluate controls over time, costs typically range between $30,000 and $70,000, depending on audit scope and organization size. Another key cost factor is internal team allocation. Engineering time, DevOps effort, legal oversight, and executive involvement are required to implement and maintain compliance. Opportunity cost from diverted resources must be considered part of the total investment. If your FinTech platform relies on multiple third-party vendors, vendor risk management reviews may require additional assessments and contractual updates. It is important to understand that SOC 2 is not a one-time project. Annual audits, control updates, infrastructure reviews, and ongoing monitoring create recurring compliance costs. Most FinTech companies allocate $20,000 to $80,000 annually for continued compliance maintenance, depending on scale. The final cost depends on system complexity, current security posture, transaction volume, cloud architecture maturity, and the readiness of your internal processes. However, the investment must be evaluated strategically. SOC 2 readiness accelerates enterprise sales, shortens due diligence cycles, increases investor confidence, and strengthens customer trust. The cost of not being compliant can be far greater in lost opportunities. At Intellivon, we help FinTech enterprises architect secure systems, implement compliance-aligned workflows, prepare documentation, and guide organizations through successful SOC 2 audits. If SOC 2 readiness is part of your growth roadmap, we're ready to help you plan and execute it efficiently. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.